Hi, Guild Wars 2 community, and welcome back to Guild Chat. Happy Friday. I'm your host, Ruby, and today we're talking about the creation of the Deepstone Fractal, the new fractal released with our last episode. Let me introduce our first round of dev guests. Guys, can you let everybody know who you are and what you worked on for this?
Yes, I'm Alex Kain. I was the lead writer on this fractal. I'm a writer and narrative designer here at ArenaNet.
And I'm Jason Reynolds, and I'm team lead for Raids and Fractals.
Awesome. Thank you for leading the charge on this.
Yeah.
So,
they did all the work.
Well, let's talk first. We've done guild chats for fractals before, but we haven't had someone from the narrative team. This had a lot more narrative and a lot more dialogue than usual.
Yes. Yes.
It did.
It did. So this was like this was the first sort of big writing project on Guild Wars 2 that I've sort of worked on solo, and so I was sort of trying to figure out what the community was expecting and what the narrative team was expecting, how we wanted to kind of push fractal narrative forward a little bit, and to see what we could do with the structure that we're given, and everything just sort of fell into place that way. The story was already sort of like the general outline of it was in place, and by the time I came in, it was really just, you know, figuring out who these characters were, how often they should talk, when they should not talk, when they should have many different things that they can say. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to explore what what we can do with fractals.
Yeah. Like him and Eli actually did a lot of back and forth as far as just placing the characters and sort of setting up tripwires so that dialogue doesn't really stomp on each other. And then there's a branching section, so like detecting when players go left or right, and like just the way that they dole out the story and the narrative. They did a pretty good job.
It sounds like it. Thank you, Alex, for... We're just here to thank you.
You folks.
Oh,
so nice.
So
Yeah, I mean, it was there was a lot of back and forth between Eli and myself, and really the rest of the team and narrative, and just making sure that all those pieces were fitting together the way we wanted them to fit, that we were playing it the way real people would actually play it. Trying to anyway.
Players are always better.
Yes, yes. So it was an interesting change from the stuff that I normally write. So. Yeah, it was really exciting to sort of see it come out and see streamers playing it and, really, really digging the story.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Jason, what was it like now that you've led the team on a number of fractal releases?
Yeah.
What was it like having something with a deeper narrative?
It was terrible. Alex, stop writing all that.
Never do it
Please.
again. No, it was actually really great because we got to explore a part of lore that we haven't really addressed at all in Guild Wars 2, since Guild Wars 1 obviously, and we got to bring back the Light of Deldramar and just have a little bit more fun making something. Whereas before with like the Morton Crescent Fractal, Twilight Oasis.
Yes.
So you saw the internal names.
Yeah.
Like that. It's a common problem.
Yeah.
we still call it Labyrinth. The Deepstone Fractal. We still call it Labyrinth internally.
In my heart. But yeah, like being able to expand on like a new story was really exciting, and being involved in that process was great because there are some fractals that are really story light, and that's good.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we don't have a ton that were very story heavy, or at least more to it.
Yeah.
And we kind of want to give a little bit more diversity to the fractals, and so we'll be doing some different stuff in the future, but yeah, I liked working on the story stuff.
That's awesome. So for those of you who haven't played it yet, we're well into spoiler territory here, so we are going to be talking about spoilers. Thank you, Mark. The infamous spoiler alert. But I say that because I would like you guys to give just kind of a high-level thing of what the story is.
Sure. So
I don't know why I looked at Jason for that.
Jason, please, you're the professional here. So yeah, I mean, when I came onto the project, it was sort of couched as this Indiana Jones but darker sort of story. It's about a couple of treasure hunters who delve into this dwarven tomb or city, and they're looking for something, and they, you know, in typical horror fashion, they find more than they bargained for.
As you do.
As you do. It's not really an interesting story if they just go in there and they find the thing that they're looking for.
There it is.
Well, that was exciting. All right, everyone, let's go home.
I want that fractal where it's like 8 feet inside the front door. All right.
There it is. Maybe for April Fools. So, yeah, it was sort of couched that way, and there were at that point there were already 2 protagonists. There was Kain and Torin, and you are accompanying them, and that was one of the first things we had to figure out is like who are the players playing, because in Fractals you assume a role of, you know, somebody else. So we were saying that you are bodyguards for these 2 thieves, and you are venturing into the lost city of Deepstone to find this treasure, and that's basically where it was when I came in. And a lot of the work that I did early on was in about figuring out what is. So I mean, that's like the overarching story, but how, like, what do these characters do? What is their purpose in the story? Is it just to, you know, for gameplay reasons? Like, is Kay going to lead you to the spiders, and Torin's going to lead you to the electro maze? You know what? Spoilers. Spoilers.
There's spiders.
Spiders and spoilers, and
Yeah, we'll talk about the spiders later. I have a bone to pick there.
yes. Yes, I had very little to do with the spiders.
I know.
They just gave them to me, and like, what am I supposed to do? Like, not use? Yeah. So, figuring out what their story was going to be and how their sort of relationship, where it was in the beginning and how it evolved over time and where it ends, there was a lot of back and forth. There were like 9 or 10 drafts of the story.
Really?
Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth. Like, it started off a sort of very conventional sort of adventure take, but as we started running it through the narrative department, we were like, you know what, like, this, like, we have 2 characters, and we're really doing something that, you know, we haven't really done in Fractals, you know, too much, which is, you know, the player character doesn't speak, but now we have 2 characters who can sort of bounce off of each other. What are their personalities like? How do they work together? You know, what is their past? And that really led to a lot of the interesting dialogue that actually wound up in the final draft.
And that grew. It started like an 11-page draft.
It was massive because it was the first Fractal I'd worked on, and like most of the things I do, I don't do any research before I start. So
that seems like a lot.
So like, I knew that the Fractal stories were lighter, and we didn't want to put players in positions where they had to stand around and wait for story to happen. That's not what the Fractals are all about. Yeah. But still, like, in my head, the amount of time it took to say some of these lines was actually much shorter than it is actually to say these lines. So we would get it into the game, and
especially with Robo Voice.
Especially with Robo Voice, where,
oh my gosh, Robo Voice.
Forever.
It's pretty. Yeah, I think that there's like a 5-second minimum for any line that you put into that.
Even if it's a yes, it takes 5 seconds.
Yeah. So it'll be yes, and then 4.5 seconds of nothing, and then the next person will say their line. So it's a little difficult to time that stuff out, but we knew very quickly that I had written way too much stuff, which is a thing that I do sometimes.
It's like you're a writer.
It's like I write maybe too much stuff. So I pulled it back in subsequent drafts, and we tightened it up. And even when I removed a lot of that extra stuff, there was still a lot of stuff to figure out with how the relationship worked, where the different story beats are. You know, the way the Fractal is sort of set up is that it works really well for telling that kind of, you know, you can tell Kay's side of the story when you're on Kay's side of the map, and you can tell Torin's side of the story when you're on Torin's side of the map, and that kind of simplified a little bit, and it was just a couple of character beats. Kay got a little bit more background than Torin did, and then it sort of picks up when you're a little further in, and then it resolves at the end.
Like you do.
Like you do with the story, almost. Which is a good thing, because if I didn't do that, people would be like very confused.
And then what?
Characters
and then
just
stopped writing.
Yeah, they just stopped. Characters just stopped talking partway through the fight, and you know,
just tired. It's fine.
Yeah.
This is hard. Let's just not.
Writing's
just sit down
difficult with the words and the nouns.
So you had mentioned Kay and Torin and the different sides of the map. Since players, I mean, we know that players are going to run this more than once, and they're going to hear this dialogue more than once. And something that you had mentioned to me was that you had to figure out how to make that work without them hearing the same things over and over and over.
They'll still unfortunately, just because I can't write infinite amounts of dialogue and we don't have the budget for infinite amounts of dialogue. If I had my druthers, like, there would just be alts for literally every single thing that you could do in the whole fractal. But what I ended up doing was there are a couple of bits where the player is, spoiler alert.
Okay, you just want the noise.
I really do. There's a maze in our labyrinth. And while you're doing that, Torin and Kay are standing on one side, and they're just standing there waiting for you to finish this puzzle. And I thought that would be a great opportunity to get some story across, but when I got the first draft of it in, I was like, people are going to get this same story every single time they play this fractal, and eventually they're just going to mute the whole thing and focus on finishing the maze. So that was where I dropped in. I think there are 3 variants for every single line that they can say during that conversation, and each one of those variants is basically gets the same point across, but it's worded differently or the tone is slightly different, and each one of those can segue into the next 3 lines of that conversation, so they can sock it into any one of those, and it makes sense. So that was that's just one example. There are a lot of alts for things like, a character comments on something when, like, a spider drops down. There may be a couple of different variants for that. A lot of different combat barks, things like that. It's I mean, you always want alts for those, but there's a lot more of that. I mean, when you have a smaller space that you're playing over and over again, you don't want players to get bored of the story. You want to give as much as possible, and we try. We tried.
Yeah. I mean, we did. I think we did pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, it sounded like you managed to get a lot of branching options in there for the constraints that you were working within.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be really, really different writing for a fractal, just for a specific fractal environment instead of open world or story.
It's like a short. So I mean, it's kind of like I imagine how the open world quests kind of work in Living World, is that they are like short stories. Where you have a very limited amount of space to tell a story, and obviously the way players are engaging with the content is a little different. They're running through it. They're going to try to go through it as quickly as possible. So figuring out how to marry that style of gameplay with story is a challenge. And yeah, fortunately the rest of the team was helping me sort of get acquainted with that storytelling style, and ultimately we were able to make a thing. We made a thing.
We did it.
Yes.
But you were explaining to me like an analogy that you have for writing for Living World compared to Raids compared to Fractals.
Yes.
Which was?
Oh, that's my cue.
Yes, I certainly was.
Yes,
well, I wasn't there for it, so tell me.
It would be hilarious if I just forgot what it was, and there's this huge. No, it's not. It is not nearly that interesting. I was saying that fractals are like short stories, the raids are like novellas, and Living World is like a full novel or like a series of novels. Just in terms of how much time you have to get a story across, introduce characters, set up plot situations, and things like that. It's you kind of have to approach each one from a different mindset, and what makes game writing in particular challenging for these, but it's like a good challenge, is that you also have to consider how the players are engaging with that content. Again, having a player stand around in a fractal for many, many minutes listening to dialogue is not good. It's not great. So, yeah.
So, speaking of introducing characters, we had the strange voice, and there was like a whole language thing happening there.
Yes.
How much fun was that?
It was a lot of fun. The story took a couple of different twists and turns in the early drafts, and the voice used to speak English or common in the game, and we decided that wasn't spooky enough. It really wasn't, and we wanted to sort of explore the idea that if this thing has been living, in the earth for so many years, maybe it wouldn't speak our language. And then it was a question of what language does it speak? And then Loke is kind of like peering from behind her, like,
excuse us,
like language. We're good at that. And I can't just say like, oh, they'll some of these words will be in some other language, because then you localize it to that language and it doesn't work.
Oh, no.
So it was an interesting conundrum, but fortunately, as is usually the case, deep diving into the Guild Wars lore helped a lot. There is some stuff in Guild Wars 1 that helped in the creation of a word cipher that
like what?
it's a word cipher. It's a letter swap cipher that I plugged into this website that lets me, just like say this letter of the alphabet equals this letter in the cipher.
Nice.
This letter of the alphabet equals this, and then I could just type out full lines of dialogue, and it would spout gibberish back at me. And it was completely unpronounceable to any human voice, so I had to change it. So instead of saying something like "What are you doing here?" I would have to arrange things around. So it would be like, "Doing what is here?" ? And then that would yield some words that sounded like words, and then Steve Bloom and John DiMaggio, who voice some of these lines. Actually, it was just Steve Bloom who had to do the spoopy lines in the weird language. Really just knocked it out of the park. It was absolutely phenomenal.
He did. And funny thing about that was part of the recording session in Burbank that I was attending. And I was bouncing back and forth between two studios that we were recording in. And I happened to walk in with no context while Steve Bloom was recording that. And I slip into the studio as he's midway through this. And you know what Steve Bloom sounds like?
He does.
And I'm just sitting there going, is anyone else hearing?
Yeah.
Or is it just me?
No.
And
Yeah.
I think it was Eve or Tom was like, it's okay.
It's normal. It's fine.
Sit down and
it's
stop looking
normal.
terrified.
Yeah.
It's like, am I having a stroke? Or are we all?
He always sounds like that.
No, these
He
aren't words.
gargles
I'm
hot
scared.
gravel and shoves a bottle brush down his throat, and then he delivers my lines.
That seems unhealthy, but
It
whatever
does.
works.
He is absolutely phenomenal. I was there. I wasn't there physically, but I was on Skype for a lot of the recording, and so I could sort of hear him deliver the lines. And then for the bits where he's talking over John DiMaggio, who plays Torin, there was this sort of the director at the booth would play Steve Bloom's lines back because they would be layered over one another, and so the timing had to sync up. And I remember John, just like aghast at what he was hearing.
What is happening?
It's like, what are you asking me to do? And the moment that the script for those scenes went into our system and editing and Loke had a chance to look at it, I had some very interesting conversations with them.
I was getting ready to say, did they just appear at your desk like,
Yes.
What are you doing?
They didn't do this. They came to me. I didn't have to go anywhere. They descended on me.
mass and surrounded your desk?
Yeah. Like, so Alex, is it possible that you've lost your mind? And I said, yes.
But it has nothing to do with
Would
this.
you like a brownie?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, Loke came to talk to me about it, and we had to come up with a game plan for how we're going to localize a language that doesn't exist. Is it going to be Steve? I think ultimately what they ended up doing, and don't hold me to this, is that it's Steve Bloom's voice in all the languages, but then the local Torin actor does their lines in their language, and they sort of sync up together.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think that's what they ended up doing. I'm not sure if that's true, but I'm only talking in front of all these people here.
I assume
and
that if that's
that
not
it's true,
Loke will be here any minute.
Yeah.
Descending once
You just,
again.
you just
We
hear
talked
the
about
patter
this.
of feet, and they slam the door open.
Well,
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about narrative, and it's exciting to see something, to go in a different direction and get to try something new. Jason, something that you worked on in there, you worked on a lot of the things, but like the hidden treasure chests are one of the
Those
elements
are those are actually one of my favorite things that were implemented. But my part as far as like working on the fractal was much more leadership sort of thing, like more like approvals and like working with them on. It was a little bit more behind the scenes. Eli and Ben did all of the implementation.
Jason was very motivational, though.
There
Very
you go, guys.
super motivational.
No,
Hey,
like
Brownie.
my job, particularly for fractals, is more to vet things, or when we're doing like a boss encounter, sort of lead the process that we go through to get encounters built and designed.
Yep.
And then also to make sure that we are going to our play tests and play testing everything, and just that everything's running. and operational. So between that and Kai, our producer, there's a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
And juggling.
Yes, it's it's one of the in terms of like the size of the content, the fractals are pretty small compared to something like a Living World episode, but there are a lot of there are a very few people working very hard full time on that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
Yep.
But the chests are pretty awesome.
Yes,
I was very happy with it.
Tell me about those.
About the chests.
Well, okay, so like the Light of Deldrimar, if anyone's not aware, it's from Guild Wars 1.
Spoilers.
Look, we'll just
they're
give you the file.
not really. Yes.
Perfect.
They're not really. Spoilers.
I enjoy them because it's something we haven't really done in Fractals before. And in raids, we have like our little mini chest that you can kind of run around and explore and find. It's got extra loot in it. And so I enjoyed the fact that was built into the Fractal on top of the Light of Deldrimar SAS skill or special action skill, or SAS skill, because I just love that stuff, like running around like ooh sparkles and then like ooh the chest. So I just ate that up. I thought it was super cool and fun.
That's awesome.
Were you involved in for other content that you work on? You have like the brainstorming meetings early on to come up with like the themes that you want to explore.
Yeah, that's kind of where my job is. It's like I do a lot of implementation for the raids, not for fractals, but for my job is to get all the brainstorms going, the product direction, make sure all the ducks are in a row, or at least like kicking them that way.
Good old duck kicking.
Oh no!
It's little nudges. But yeah, and then Kyle, our producer, will help me get timelines set up and schedules and make sure all the meetings are running. And then I can go in there and the team works together to brainstorm the stories before we hand off fully to narrative. And then we brainstorm the encounters and a lot of the events and so on and so forth. And then everything it goes through paper design to pitching it to leads to which is actually a really fun process, I think. The pitch, like a lot of people are very nervous about it.
Really?
Yeah, because you have to kind of like in a room with like a PowerPoint presenting to Jason V, and which is very intimidating.
Yeah.
But I love it. I think it's
scary.
great.
I mean, he's a nice guy, but he is
super nice guy.
I mean, I've been like a fly on the wall at a couple of those, and I think I've said maybe like 5 collective words in all the ones I've been in, but. It's there's a lot of pressure on, on
there is a lot of pressure.
To
like
get up there and really sell it.
Yeah, and you also want people to like your thing, right?
Well, yeah.
But yeah, we get through pitch, and then once we're pitch approved, we start building the prototypes, and then from there, I think we have about a month and a half roughly, where we expect start to finish, it's playable, but it's prototypes. So everything's gray box. Which I think Ben brought in some really cool pictures.
Yeah, we've got some
that you'll get to see
soon.
Of like this stuff. Yeah, so like this is what the fractals look like in prototype.
This is what most of the game looks like in prototype, really.
Yeah, it's
that is Gray Box is a good name for it.
Yeah, no, I mean there's a reason why we call it that.
There's some red boxes over there. Though. I don't know about
those
that.
are special and secret. Nobody knows what they are.
Speaking of movies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of a month and a half of getting everything up through prototype, and then approvals with getting more leads involved and sign off, and my job is to make sure that everything's moving and growing the way that it should be.
Awesome. All right, well, I have one more question for you guys, and then we'll move on to our next set of Fractal devs. What's something little and maybe off to the side in this Fractal that you really love and you hope players find? Or you're happy that they already found, and you only can have one?
For me, it would be the source material of the cipher that the voice uses. It has been used in Guild Wars before, though not in the way that I'm using it.
Okay.
I'll say that. I'll let the community do the work.
I really like the spiders. Like the way they skitter around.
The spiders are great.
Why?
The spiders are so great.
It's so well. Ben did a lot of really cool stuff in this Fractal.
Right.
Like how the spiders skitter.
Ben's entire interview is going to be about the spiders.
I can appreciate the work while still being horrified by the spiders that are bigger than me.
It's gonna be good. He's got like 14 hours of spider footage in there. It's gonna be. You guys are in for a treat today.
Of actual spiders.
The source material is spiders. That's the spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Don't. All right, thank you guys very much. You all hang in here with us for just a second, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. We have a new round of dev guests. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and talk about what you worked on for this fractal?
I'm Peter Larkin, and I was the QA embed.
Yay.
And I am Ben Arnold. I am the content programmer for Fractals and Raids.
Awesome. All right, so what does the QA embed do besides just slamming into the same wall a million times?
I test everything, obviously, but it's also a lot of I participate in the brainstorming feedback, and I go to all the meetings. So I'm kind of like I'm there during the whole process, so I can give like early feedback if there's concerns from a QA perspective when something's being implemented, brainstormed like early on, so we don't like build something and I'm like, oh god, guys, this is gonna
why would you do this?
why is this happening?
They're just walking in, picking up the treasure and leaving. This is terrible.
Yeah, you end up playing it like 5 times more than any of the devs, so the feedback is always really good.
Yeah. How about you, Ben?
So I usually will do more of the techie stuff, like build some more complicated skills, do anything involving math or anything that requires code. I will design things like the whole spider area. I designed that, but usually Elijah handles more of the overarching design of the story. He came up with the original pitch and the design docs for all that and built the final boss and most of the other stuff that's not like a procedurally generated puzzle or a crazy skill.
And we don't have Elijah, so you are both Ben and Elijah today.
Okay.
You're speaking
I'll
for
put on 2 hats.
everyone.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
So I know we talked with Alex a little bit about narrative. How did we come up with, okay, let's go to this Dwarven fractal, and here's what we want to tell, and here's where we want to go?
We really wanted a change of scenery with this one. We wanted to go somewhere we hadn't gone before. We wanted to have sort of a theme that we hadn't had before. We didn't really, maybe Swampland a little bit, but we didn't have much of like a horror kind of dark theme. And we were looking around at different types of scenery that worked really well for this, assets that we had already, so we didn't have to build a whole new prop set. And the Dwarven Ruins ended up being a really good choice for this. So we were kind of thinking about it. We were sketching out little ideas. We kind of were thinking to have sort of a Mines of Moria feel to it. It ended up not being quite so grand as that, but we went along with that, and then we decided, this is really good for horror. We have all these different creatures like spiders that would be really good for this, imps, all those kind of things, and then we just... I didn't come up with the story. That was more Elijah and Alex, but that's kind of how it started.
Okay. Let's talk about the spiders.
The spiders. So the spiders, I think a lot of people won't notice this because the spiders are really weak. They're little baby spiders and little poison spiders, and the big spiders don't have this, but we actually did build a new AI for them, and there are PowerPoints if we have time to go through them. But it's a divergence from how we normally do AI in an MMO. Normally, yeah, here, Spider Apocalypse.
Let's look. Here's a
Let's
thing
do
I've
it.
never said before. Let's look at the spider PowerPoint.
Let's look at this. So this is actually a PowerPoint that I did for the design team. Anytime I do anything remotely techie, I like to make a little PowerPoint and present it to the team so that they can use it in whatever they want to do. I've actually had a few people come and talk to me about this, so you may see this. So this, yeah, do the GIFs actually work? This is a GIF. It doesn't appear to be working. That's too bad.
No.
But imagine this spider's really scary and it like moves around in a scary way, like a real spider. This isn't what spiders normally look like. So
I like that. Oh, God.
yeah, no, you can go ahead. So on the right we have the player, on the left we have the spider. Like normally, if you go to the next slide, this is what happens in an MMO. It just walks straight up to you and then it starts like auto-attacking you or whatever. It doesn't feel like a spider. It feels like an MMO mob.
His little face.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So if you go on, I think there's another GIF that this is showing normal spiders. Just imagine them attacking you from like 400 units away, doing what mobs normally do. And this isn't what I wanted. I wanted to play around with something new because I always like to do weird new things. So this is what I really wanted. I want them to kind of dart in and out, go back and forth, kind of skitter around. And when you're playing the Fractal, you probably won't notice this because you'll be just AoEing everything and they'll be dying really fast. But if you stop and pay attention, you'll see they kind of dart in and out. And for this behavior, I had to do just some very simple things. I didn't want to make a really complicated AI for this. So like they, if you go forward, well, so here's like some example movement patterns. They would come kind of darting back and forth to you, and then when they get in, they would dart in and out as they attack. Instead of just staying in range of your attacks, they'll do an attack, and then they'll try to get out of range of you. And player attacks are huge, so it ends up not really mattering. But if you go on, there's a little bit of technical stuff.
But they're trying their best.
Yeah. I'm trying to give this a high-level explanation, but imagine the spider is S, and then the player is T for some reason. Go ahead and go forward. All you do is you get the offset by subtracting them. This is simple vector math. Click. You get the distance with a random distance. This tells you how far away the spider is. Click. And then we want to do sort of a random angle. We rotate that offset vector that is scaled to the distance by that random angle. And then we can move the spider in that sort of zigzag pattern. We just keep doing that every now and then. And then when he gets close, you do sort of a two-part attack where he moves in, does the attack, and moves out. And we have these sort of areas of influence here that determine how the AI works. These are colored here, but if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there's sort of different wait times assigned to each one. So based on the distance to the nearest player, it will pick one of these wait times to decide how fast it's going to be thinking. That way you can imagine if you're really far away, the spider's going to kind of sit there and wait and just kind of hide in its corner. And then when you get closer, it sort of skitters forward a little bit. And when you get really close, it's going to skitter around all over the place and go crazy. Click. Yeah,
we don't
these
have
are
a
just
clicker. So.
state names. Click. There was one more issue with this, which is walls, which is really interesting. Like we could do some really complicated pathfinding logic to figure out how to get around walls, but that really complicates the thing and makes it more expensive than it needs to be. And this simple vector check is really simple. So what we would do is click. We just go ahead and generate it like we're just moving in random directions, and then if it goes inside a wall, we say, oh, don't do that one, try again. And we'll try again about 5 times, and usually it ends up generating a vector that allows you to go around the wall nice and easy. And then there's another GIF that doesn't work, but yeah, that's the spider talk.
So where did you get these ideas to make the spiders more spider-like?
Well, whenever I make something in the game, I don't like to just kind of copy what we've been doing before. I always like to try to approach things from a different angle and see if there's something we can do that's new and interesting. And, you know, within reason, because a lot of times you'll spend a lot of work on something that doesn't really matter. This ended up not being that much work. But for this, I just wanted spiders that were spiders, and I just had the idea that we can do that. I looked at some GIFs and then just, you know, screwed around, and it ended up working out all right.
Maybe you talk to somebody that has spiders.
Yeah, I've had a couple tarantulas over the years, and so
I'm never coming to your house.
Yeah, well, I don't have any right now, but when I heard you working on it, and I was kind of like sidled over and was like, so I hear you're working on spider movement.
Yeah.
And so I gave pointers on like how they kind of tend to move in short bursts. They stop and feel the ground to like tell where their prey is, and then they'll kind of lurch in the direction. And because almost all spiders use vibrations to tell where their prey is, and will suddenly they have like sudden movements. They'll be completely still for hours, and then just lightning fast they shoot off in a direction. So
yeah, there's actually parts when the spiders will move where they'll kind of like dart off to an area where the player can't even reach it because there's valid nav mesh there, and that's all the spider cares about. But it's like darting between a crack in the wall almost and then coming back out. It ends up feeling really natural, and that was just sort of an emergent behavior that happened due to the simple behavior that was created.
I'm frozen with horror right now, and I'm positive this room is full of spiders. That's what I'm convinced of.
Yeah.
So, did you participate after Ben was working on this? Did you participate in kind of giving feedback on yes, this feels right?
Yeah, I gave a little bit of feedback on it that it looked
Yeah.
good. I mean, I understood that we weren't making a spider simulation, so I was
Yeah.
I wasn't like, no, you need to like change this stuff about the spiders. But yeah, I liked that they had the short, quick movements, and it made them feel different. You know,
Yeah.
And they weren't just another like MMO creature that just kind of like runs directly toward you and
Yeah.
starts attacking you. So
And do we have plans to retroactively change every spider in the game to terrify me?
No
Okay,
way.
thank you.
The way I built this, I was, lazy programmer, typical me. I did it so that it would work really well in our instance. It actually just says, where are all the players in the instance, and then it figures out which is the closest and all that. That's not something you can't do when there's like 60 players in the open world. So if we were to just copy-paste this into the open world, it wouldn't work without tweaks.
Yes.
So, and it would probably break everything. So no, you're not going to see that. But you might see it in some instance content going forward.
Nice. And Peter's like, please don't break everything.
Yeah.
That's my job.
I'm not testing that.
Yeah.
I do want to take a moment to point and laugh at you, the concept of you being lazy, because you work ridiculously hard.
Yeah,
so
but
don't undersell yourself. But I understand the concept of efficiency. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, lazy
Yeah,
Ben.
efficient
well,
implementation is
exactly.
what it was.
Like
yeah.
if I can do an extra, 20% of work up front to save 80% of work later, I like to do stuff like that.
yeah, then you can make us more things.
Exactly.
What are some other things that you guys worked on that you particularly are happy with in this dungeon?
Well, the puzzles are pretty cool.
Yay!
And QAing them was probably a nightmare.
Yeah, well, it was
Sorry, Peter.
the maze was a lot.
Yeah.
What I ended up doing with the maze was I did my normal testing around it, but also literally every time I went into the instance, we can skip stuff, but I was like, I really shouldn't skip this because I just need to look at this maze as many times as I possibly
Yeah.
can. And so every single time I went through the instance, even if I was in there to look at something else, I just did the maze. Like, it was... I did it hundreds and hundreds of times.
And that's like a good lesson learned, because the reason for that is that this is a procedural maze. And normally we don't do procedural things, not in Guild Wars and probably not in many MMOs. So that's something I wanted to explore with this. Both of the puzzles, I should say, the little Tetris simple one, it's super easy, and then the maze have sort of a procedural aspect to it. They're not going to be the same each time you go through. Because of that, you got to test it a lot, and you're still not going to see everything. Suddenly it's going to go live, and there's going to be an edge case you didn't think of.
Yeah, and the really tricky thing is when I did find a bug, there's not a repro step. I can't be like, do 1, 2, 3, and then the bug happens.
Yeah.
I have to be like, maybe this will happen when you do the maze, because there really isn't anything you can do to
I swear
force
it
it to happen
happened.
again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just got in the habit of taking a lot of screenshots, or I'd call Ben over whenever something happened so he could see it.
Yeah.
He didn't see it happen, but he could see the immediate aftermath in the game, and then it helped him figure out what was going on.
And that's another great lesson. Like, even if it is fully procedural, there are ways we can make that make that easier. Like, you could have had the ability to kind of get whatever seed was being used and then give that to me so that I could procedurally
Right.
generate the exact same maze from it and then see the repro for the bug.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
that would have been what I should have done.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened.
We know for the next time we
Lessons
make a maze.
learned.
Yeah.
And it's nice not to stagnate. So
Yes.
well done. And I think didn't you give us a GIF of the...
Yeah, we have some. So this is actually, this is an earlier iteration, and I actually have another PowerPoint. I don't know if we have time, but for this one, you can see it sort of generating. Here we go. Labyrinth grid.
We're
Let's
okay
do it.
on time.
Yeah. Click. So this is another one I gave to the design team. Starting with just the Tetris puzzle, this one's really easy. We call it the Tetris puzzle internally because it's essentially the way it mechanically works is the same as Tetris. You have these grids of cells, and then the shapes kind of move down. Except in this, they fall out the bottom, and then they're not like 3D shapes that can rotate. It's just one line. And we sort of kind of generate a path through it. We just look at like what was the previous valid path position, and then kind of generate a sort of random offset for the next one. There's a little bit of splitting logic, but it's super simple. People just blink through this or use their shadow steps or whatever. Click. But the procedural maze one, this one was more interesting. This one was a bit harder to figure out. I knew I wanted something procedural for the maze because you're going to be using the Light of Delgamore to kind of raise tiles and walk through it while creatures are attacking you. And I didn't want you to just memorize the fastest way through it and just go that way every time. I wanted you to have to react to dead ends and things like that. But we also wanted to make sure that the worst case scenario isn't super bad, where you have this snaking path that takes 30 minutes to get through, or you have just a straight line path to the end. Because when it's procedurally generated, we can't really know exactly what players are going to get generated. Click. Here's a GIF that doesn't work. I pulled this from Wikipedia. If you Google depth first search on Wikipedia, you'll see something like this for maze. If you're a computer science student and you're learning algorithms in class, you've probably made this exact generator. But this is the naive generation algorithm, which is depth first search. And I started with that, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. If you click to the next slide, you'll see it's probably hard to see with the contrast here, but just the way this works with the generic depth first search on this kind of a grid, you get a lot of very long straight line paths, and you also have sort of this grid alignment that doesn't allow you to have more kind of diagonal paths. It's very I don't know. It's
left, right, left, right,
left, right. Yeah, it's not the greatest shape for what I wanted. So I had to make some tweaks to that algorithm. It still used depth first search to do it, but there is sort of, I think I called it neighbor ownership depth first search, or corner ownership. I don't know. It just, instead of considering just adjacent tiles, you consider neighbors, and you do a little bit more complex logic. Click. But yeah, neighbor ownership, DFS. Shorter turns, windy paths. It was just a more pleasing algorithm in my mind. Click. So the problem is, even with my new algorithm, we still had this issue. It's random, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Best case for players, at least, I say best case because it's the fastest way through, you just get this straight line from start to end, and then worst case, it takes forever. And that's just a huge disparity that I didn't want. But we can minimize the disparity, click, by splitting this into actual 3 sub-mazes that are sort of rectangles. So we still look at the best case and the worst case, but you can see they're a lot more in line with each other. In the best case, since we're kind of going through these 3 mazes with 3 end and start points in different positions, you get a more snaking pattern just naturally. And you'll actually notice this as you're going through. You'll see the checkpoints. These are the checkpoints at the starts of each maze that you go through. And it ended up working a lot better. The generation was a lot more consistent. And yeah, it ended up feeling better in general. But yeah, that's maze stuff.
Very cool. It's interesting to see how you, because with procedural generated anything, that's my thought. What if it gives you something that's very easy? And
that's the beauty of it, yeah. Like you have to be aware of the things that can happen. You can't be aware of everything, but you can try to, at least in this case, I could have been a bit more aware of probably edge cases and things. There was one issue that we had to patch really quick because I didn't think of an edge case. But now it should all be good.
And I didn't see it in the hundreds of times that I went through.
Exactly.
And, yeah. And since it's random, I never saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I had made a more intelligent algorithm to generate it, that edge case would have been impossible. But I did the lazy programmer thing and did something sort of hacky workaround that made that edge case possible.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about maybe not necessarily edge cases, but things that you managed to break, because some of them were amazing.
Yeah. The Tetris puzzle hallway. So what happens is if your health hits 0, it teleports you back to the beginning because you failed it, but we didn't want to kill you. The problem is that the game thinks you went down. So it was spawning Fractal Avengers, Fractal Vindicators, Elementalists were dropping lava fonts. And so I don't know if we got the screenshot, but I had a screenshot of like multiple Fractal Avengers like on the tile with a lava font. It was this big mess. It was chaos.
Oh.
Yeah. And that was just from me. Like if you can imagine 5 players that were failing that, leaving stuff everywhere.
All by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the things that I don't anticipate. Like I'm not testing with every instability on anytime I make these fractals. So it's good to have Peter going through and trying all these different things.
The other fun one was the tornadoes at the elemental spawns. I like my main on live is Elementalist, and so I was like, I wonder what happens if an Elementalist turns into a tornado and then gets caught by the tornado. And it turned out that like it overrode the transform that the boss tornado put on you and gave you your skills in the tornado, your Elementalist tornado skills, and so then you could use those to like escape the tornado, and it was hilarious.
Feature.
Yeah.
It turns out like a lot of transforms could get you out of the tornado, but that's how I found it.
Really?
Yeah, and so that's how we got it fixed. Yeah, sorry, that's on Exploit.
And that was WinTech.
Yeah.
Had you guys? It was like you were stuck in there forever, right?
Yeah.
I was trying so hard to remember how that worked.
WinTech just requires a lot of testing. There's a lot of cases where if we're not careful, the player could have the wind permanently applied to them until they change maps. And it essentially, depending on the type of wind tech, whether it's like moving you to a point or just a static vector, You can like fly around. You'll get stuck just kind of hovering somewhere. It's hilarious, but it's bad.
Yeah.
We call it wind tech because it's primarily used for wind, but really it's just arbitrary forces, and it's really low level, so it's really easy to accidentally apply force and not remove it, and then just break everything. Which happened.
It turns out.
Yes.
But in a funny way. So.
I flew all over the Fractal. It was great.
Oh,
Did you?
Yeah.
And then you prevented the rest of us from
I did.
having
I'm sorry.
Wish I'd known. Well, I'll ask you guys the same question I asked the other two. What is one of your favorite things that you worked on or put in there that you're looking forward to players coming across, or they already have?
Yeah, well, they already have, I guess. But just the stuff I've already talked about, just the maze and the spider. It was really fun to build, and I was hoping players would enjoy it. So far, players seem to like it. I haven't heard a whole lot about the spiders, I think just because they kill them all so fast. But the maze seems to be pretty fun.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's more my job to not put things in the in the map for people to see.
Things that were broken that I took out.
Yeah, I mean, I give the feedback on the spider movement.
Yeah.
I mean, that was mostly Ben, but I gave some feedback based on my experience.
Expert opinion.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very, very much for coming on here.
Of course.
I
you.
appreciate the time. And we will see you guys on the next Guild Chat.